Hi there, I'm Andrew, welcome to Adventure Rider. Today I'm very excited to be sitting on and reviewing the Kove 800X. This is the bike that is squarely aimed at taking on the Yamaha T7 with its massive fan base by coming up with a middleweight adventure bike that's lighter, more powerful and cheaper than its competition. So on paper, this is a really interesting concept. I've had a good chance to ride it both on-road and off-road, and there are some really good things about this bike and there are some things that need further development, I think. That's bloody fueling. Today, I've been lucky enough to be given this by a friend of a friend who was extremely generous because he was one of the first 30 customers in the UK to receive the 800X, and he hasn't actually even ridden it himself. So it had 50 miles on it when I got it, and I've done more mileage than him. And he said I could use and abuse it. So that's what I've tried to do. And yeah, well, let's start with the sort of headline features. So first of all, the weight has been claimed at 185 kilos, which would put it 20 kilos lighter than the T7, which is a phenomenal amount. It seems to come in a realistic measuring capacity at around 191 to 195, depending on who's measuring. So we're still a good sort of 12, 15 kilos lighter. As I stand next to a T7, I can't see lots of unnecessary things adorned on it that would easily save that much weight. And if anything, as I look at the Kove, you'll notice you've got things like the crash bars and a substantial rear rack, even the chunky rear pillion foot pegs, which all add up to extra weight. So it's a remarkable amount. I sat on this back at the ABR festival this year in June, and it was immediately clear that it was lighter. You could genuinely feel that difference just by sitting on it, which made me really excited to try it. Because as we all know, middleweight bikes, by any stretch of the imagination, they don't feel middleweight, they feel heavy. They're 200 kilos plus usually. So having a bike here that comes in at the same weight as something like a Royal Enfield Himalayan does, it's just a single cylinder, is quite astonishing. The power is definitely more powerful than a T7, and you can immediately feel that power. It is very fast on the road. I'll come back to the engine and the power in a moment because I've got a lot to say about that. And then in terms of other features, it comes with things like a steering damper. It's got lots of rider modes. Well, it's got lots of adjustments to things like traction control, ABS settings that you can customize, which is a step up from what you normally get on things like the T7. So overall, it's a package that's been designed very well. And if I get off so you can actually see the bike, it's a good looking bike. It really is. I mean, of course, they have designed this squarely around the aesthetics of a T7. You can see it. It's lower. It has things like the tank holding its weight slightly lower as well, and a larger tank capacity. So again, lots of things there to like about the concept of the bike. So in terms of the road mannerisms of this bike, it is all hinging around this fueling issue. I'm going to call it an issue because it is pretty irritating on road. It's very binary. The on-off throttle is just much more noticeable than on any other bike. Throttle. So if you are absolutely caning it, and if you're riding it on a very spirited Sunday ride in a sporty fashion, I don't think you'd notice it too much if you are really giving it full beans. But when you're modulating things like the clutch and the throttle through traffic, you're going at slow speeds, you've got a car in front that's slowly accelerating and decelerating, just the jerkiness and the binary nature of that fueling becomes really wearing. So it makes it just a tiring ride and a tiring place to be when you're not absolutely going 100%. Similarly, when we then translate that into off-road, I am going to go as far to say as it's not really manageable as it is unless you are an extremely competent rider, and even then you'd probably not enjoy the situation. So today I'm on a series of very wet, sometimes chalky, but also very muddy trails around Surrey, and the tyres are not helping because they're 50-50 tyres, which don't really give you 50% off-road ability in my view, especially in the UK where it is largely muddy. They need to be swapped for something like the Anless Capra X. That would massively transform the grip, but it's not the grip that's causing me the issues. It's just modulating the throttle, going up the trails. It's incredibly binary. It's very difficult, obviously, when you're standing to feather the clutch very finely to get around the on-off nature of that fueling. Just, you know, with normally throttle is enough to be able to manage those climbs, those ruts where you've got to flow in and out of the right points, or when you've got slippy obstacles coming up, you need to get around them. It just is making life quite difficult. It's quite wearing on the arms. So that needs sorting. You need to, I think, have a full remap. Now, I don't believe that's particularly difficult. So there is a whole host of accessories available through Mr. Wang is the website, which is what all the Kove owners are currently turning to, which is from China, but has specific parts available for this bike, such as the rally exhaust. So having that power on the road feels pretty good. It feels pretty dialed in when you're on it, and the geometry of the bike is really, I think, quite good. So they've managed to look at what the T7 was and what made it popular, but they've also managed to find lots of little incremental improvements. So the seat height is a little bit lower, which is something that people often but state as a fact about the T7, that it's quite a high bike. I have a T7 and it's no problem for me, but I'm 6'2". If you are less than 6 foot, you may start finding you need the lowered seat or to lower it yourself. But this one is low enough that I think it just helps a lot when it comes to off-road handling, all things being equal with fueling and tyres. I think that lower position is going to appeal to a lot more people. The overall geometry, the layout of everything, it's very sort of natural. It is an okay position when you're standing on the bike. Things like the foot pegs, they've done a really good job. I know it sounds really trivial, but pretty much every adventure bike I ride, you always need to get a brake pedal extender because it's always difficult to find with big boots on. And this one is just in perfect position. It's very ergonomically laid out. It's little things like that where they have done a very good job. Things like the TFT as well is vastly improved over something like a T7. I'm not traditionally one for lots of riding modes, but this has some really useful features. It's very, very easy to access the menus. You can turn off the ABS on the front altogether. You can turn it off once, or you can turn it off altogether forever, and it will double check you want to do that. Of course, you can go back and turn those things on. Similarly with the traction control, it's got tire pressure monitors, things like the tires themselves. They have the right angle valve stems, which is just brilliant, makes it so much easier. Lots of little details that add up to an overall pleasurable experience. This whole dash area is very clean, it's very simple, and the bike feels slim. It feels really incisive when you're cutting through traffic in terms of being able to get through spaces that sometimes you might struggle with even on other middleweight adventure bikes. One thing that I kind of wish that they had sorted is the exhaust. So this is one of the criticisms of the T7, is having the side slung exhaust, because if you're going to drop the bike, then it's pretty much likely on this side that it's going to get damaged, scratched, and possibly bent. The T7 has it mounted directly to the rear subframe, which isn't great, and again is one of the ongoing criticisms of it. This one is a separate piece that is detachable and replaceable, so that's a step up. But for me, I would definitely love to see a exhaust going underneath the bike. The exhaust then brings me on to another point. This exhaust is meaty. It's loud, and well, I say it's loud. It's certainly loud compared to most of the bikes out there, which are all but non-existent sound-wise these days with the regulations. It's usually the engine noise that you can hear over everything else. The idle speed is quite high on this. It seems to sit quite often just below 2000 RPM, which doesn't sound like a massive problem, but when it's idling at that speed, it adds to that sort of overall hecticness when combined with the fueling and the slightly loud exhaust. And as you sit at lights, it's just a little bit more draining. And I wish that was just a little bit lower. And again, that can probably all be adjusted with an ECU or the remap of the fueling. Things like the seat, I've found it to be pretty comfortable. I think people have had sort of mixed reviews of it so far. The actual seat fabric itself does have an ability to sort of bunch up and leave creases, which is a little bit cheap in feel, but again, not really a huge issue. Kove are aware of this from what I understand from some of the other owners and sound like they're on it. There's a couple of other first day niggles that I've been aware of, such as the battery is supposed to come with a lithium battery, but because of issues shipping with lithium batteries, which is something that all bike brands generally face, of course, they've fitted a standard battery, which by the way sits in the front. It doesn't sit where you'd expect it to under the seat, because this is all tank. I'll come back to that. But that's a little bit disappointing, and apparently they will get round to sorting it. The impression I get from owners is that Kove are definitely saying the right things. They seem very keen to resolve any issues. I think that they are just a little bit out of their depth in the sense of these bikes, the 450 Rally and this 800X, have been very, very much in demand. So getting the right stock, obviously not having a very localized, very established dealer network, it's difficult to iron these problems out. So sometimes the bike just comes and goes straight to a customer, especially when it's a new bike. And let's not be too harsh, because we have bike brands who shall not be named that are very well established in this industry that are bringing bikes out in their latest versions with significantly bad known issues. So I think we can allow Kove minor things like the battery, the seat creasing, like these are really small things in the bigger scheme of things. The suspension is adjustable. It's a lot firmer than on a T7. Again, one of the things that people have said is too soft about a T7 and that it needs adjustment. I have lots of thoughts and opinions on that, but when it comes to this, I would say it's kind of been adjusted just about right. So it feels like on the road, you definitely get less roll when you're on and off the throttle, which is all the time because of this fueling, but when you are off-road it seems to absorb the bumps quite nicely. I don't think it's anywhere near the sort of KTM levels of quality of suspension, but it's definitely good enough. Like, it's not a talking point in its own right. They've done a decent job with that. The bike comes with the Pirelli Scorpion tyres, which is kind of standard for most middleweight adventure bikes in this category. I don't like them that much because I find that they don't really serve a purpose off-road in the UK, in all honesty. You know, at the end of summer, it should be dry, it's just not. And these things don't have the necessary tread depth and grip to make it a pleasurable experience. You can do it, I've done it today, but it wasn't nice and it wasn't fun, in all honesty. So I would immediately switch these for Kove 800X tyres, which are absolutely brilliant, and they just give nothing away on the road, even though they are quite knobbly. They've got tons of grip, they're very reassuring on the road, but then off-road they are all but a full off-road tyre in the way that they feel and perform. They're fantastic. So that would really help here. We've got tubeless rims as well, which is something I think that a lot of people do like in practice, carrying around inner tubes and stuff like that. For spares can be a little bit annoying. This rack on the back, it says max road limit 5 kilos, which is a little bit laughable for the size of rack it is to only take 5 kilos, but I think we can ignore that. It seems to take weight on it just fine. The kickstand sensor is very strangely placed for me, and it looks like it's in a particularly likely spot to get snagged on something. Again, I am conjecturing here. This may be unfair and it's a very minor point, but I just think that could have been sort of hidden a little bit better. These are all, again, things that are really quite minor. The exposure of the shaft on the gear shift lever is much like a T7, pretty exposed, but I think even more so here. It does, however, look a little bit more robust than on a T7. You get pretty solid, decent LED lights again, which feels pretty premium. Like, overall, I think the looks and the finish of the bike, apart from little tiny things like the seat cover, feel really premium and really good. And when you are at speed, flowing along on the road, and you're not being made aware of this throttle issue, then I think you feel like you are on a very well put together premium machine. At high speeds, it's a very stable bike, and that's something that I couldn't necessarily say about the T7. I do find it quite vibey at high speeds, certainly around the feel of the front bars. They feel a little bit flighty. This one, I think the steering damper is just a brilliant touch. It doesn't need to be the world's most impressive, high-end, expensive steering damper. It just needs to smoothen out those little vibrations on-road and off-road to make a huge difference to that sort of feel of the bike. The screen at the front is, I don't think it's had Adrian Newey looking at it through the wind tunnel. It's pretty sort of basic. A lot of people said it, it causes buffeting and stuff. That adventure bikes are pretty much all known for that, and unless you want to go for some enormous screen that you can feel like you're in a car behind, I think it's fine. I don't think it needs to be worried about too much, but this can come off very easily with a few torque bolts, and you can then change that and upgrade it. A couple of other really small things, like the side stand is pretty tall. It's very upright, so if you are going to park off-road, just be careful that you're not parking on a slightly raised stone in the ground or something that makes it even more upright, because it wouldn't take much wind or someone just touching it for it to fall over the other way. So there's lots to digest, and it can be difficult to come to one neat conclusion here because there are so many great things. What it set out to do was create a more powerful, lighter and cheaper version of a Yamaha T7. The cost element of that equation isn't that interesting to me personally. Most of the reviews out there are by the mainstream journalist media, who only talk about motorbikes as if you only have the option of buying new, but of course you don't. You can buy used, and it's a very, very good market for buyers at the moment. So if you go for the same price as this and a T7, you will be getting one that's literally a year old with a handful of miles on it, in very, very good condition, with a whole load of accessories and upgrades to it. So it completely changes that sentence, because you can't get one of these used, but you can get a T7 used, and a pretty good one at that. So I'm going to park that point because I don't think it's the focal point for me anyway. I'm more worried about the execution and the quality. And the performance is undoubtedly there. The weight saving is undoubtedly there. The actual important things about this bike are generally brilliant. They really, really are. But it's so dependent on this fuel mapping issue, and the reviews that have been out there so far have, if anything, underplayed it in my view, because it's just ruining an otherwise really good bike. If this had anything like the refinement of the throttle fueling of my Yamaha, then it would be an absolute no-brainer, because this would just leave it for dead in pretty much all situations. It'd be easier off-road, it would be more dynamic and fun when I want to have a bit of a naughty blast on-road, and getting through traffic and stuff, it'd be easier. Dependability, reliability, just don't know. The 450 Rally review that I did has had a lot of comments and replies with people saying they have had long-term ownership of that bike and it has done them proud, and that's really reassuring. Of course, there's a less developed dealer network, but the parts really in this bike, there's nothing in it that should be that prohibitively difficult to replace, repair and upgrade, so I wouldn't let that put you off entirely. But for peace of mind, the biggest draw about something like a T7 is the fact that it has the most reliable of engines, and I would kind of err on the side of caution often if I'm going far abroad. But the people who have been the early adopters of this, I think, will be really, really pleased, because they're likely to be people who have taken in their stride a few of these niggling issues, and with just a little bit of care and attention to some of the things that I've banged on about quite a lot in this review, you could transform this bike into something that I think makes it the best all-round middleweight adventure bike by quite a long way. And the fact that it would be the best priced is also a big bonus in that respect. So Kove are clearly onto something good. Every time they release a bike, it seems to get people very, very interested. So having had it, it's great, but it's not there yet. It's sort of rough around the edges and unfinished, but I've really enjoyed kind of getting to grips with it, and I'll be really interested to try it when and if those things have been ironed out. So thank you very much for watching. We would love to know what you guys think about the concept. If you certainly have had any experience riding this, if you're one of the 30 people out there with one of the bikes, do let us know, and stay tuned for more video reviews of the best bikes out there and the best gear in the adventure riding world. Thank you so much for watching. See you again soon. Goodbye.